Now we're going to move to validating user inputs. Okay, so validating user inputs means that we want to make sure that they are valid before we process them in our PHP code. As an example, you want to make sure that if a user inputs their email address, we want to make sure that it's actually a proper email address. Okay, so let's create a variable my email. Okay, so we're going to let's use the same as we have done there. So this is going to be the email that the user has input in the email address field. Okay, so first of all, before we validate the email, we are still going to clean the email first. Okay, so we're going to still use the filter var function to clean the email. All right, so now we have a clean email. So if we echo cleaned email, for example, okay, we've got our email clean. Okay, now the other step is we want to validate this email. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take out the @ symbol, okay, and then refresh the page. So this is our cleaned email, but we know it's not a correct email. It's not valid email, okay? So to see if the email is valid or not, we're going to use the filter var function again, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to echo a paragraph where we're going to check if the email is valid or not. So we're going to write email validation. Okay. And then we're going to print the results of the filter var function. So this time the filter var function is going to take as second parameter filter validates email rather than sanitize email. Okay, validates email. All right, let's refresh the page, and now we can see email validation followed by nothing. And the reason why is because filter var is returning false, and if you echo false, you don't see anything on the screen. So it's returning false because the email is not valid. Okay, but if we had a valid email, so let's change the value of the email, then we get the value of the email instead. So filter var is returning the actual value of the email if the email is valid. Okay, otherwise it returns false. So let's use the return value of the filter var to write a simple piece of code. So if the email is valid, we're going to echo valid email. Otherwise, we are going to echo invalid email. Okay. So you're going to echo a paragraph. Valid email. Otherwise, invalid email. So if we refresh, we can see that we're getting there a valid email. If we change the value of the email, now you can see invalid email. Okay. All right. So now let's move to the URL validation. So we're going to use the same example we have used earlier. So we've got a variable set to a URL, and we're going to clean it first before we validate it. Okay, so to validate the URL, or before we do that, let's just echo a paragraph saying the value of the cleaned URL. So cleaned URL, and then let's just add the variable there. Okay, so that's our cleaned URL. So now we want to validate it. Okay, so we're just going to echo a paragraph again, and then inside the paragraph we're going to use the filter var function. So URL validation, and let's add the filter var function there, and rather than sanitize, we're going to use validate. Okay, so if we refresh the page, we can see the actual URL, and the reason why is because the URL is valid, so the filter var function is returning the value of the URL. Otherwise, if it was not valid, then the filter var function would have returned false. Okay, so that was a quick overview for PHP filters. In the next video, we are going to use this to build our first contacts form.